I'm going to be breaking down the #1 marketing trend for real estate investors in 2026. If you are still pulling all these massive lists from PropStream or Batch and just thinking that more data is going to get you more deals, that is absolutely not going to work in 2026. And that is the closest thing to just setting your marketing budget on fire. And that volume game really worked a couple years ago, especially right after COVID. But in 2026, a lot of those strategies don't work anymore, and there's a completely new way of doing things. And we know this because we track 4.5 million actions every single day on our platform, and we have a huge community of 5,000 investors that we listen to every day. And we use all that data to reverse engineer exactly what's working right now so that you don't have to. The investors that are winning right now are not going super wide and shallow. They're going very narrow and very deep. They're sending fewer postcards, making fewer calls, making fewer texts, and just doing less marketing in general. And they're closing massive spreads on huge deals because they're just not competing with a ton of people right now. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact 4 pillars of this system. First, it's going to start with market intelligence and really just understanding the best areas from a state, a county, a zip code, and a neighborhood level. Then we're going to move into data hygiene. So exactly understanding how we're going to be managing our data and which lists are driving the highest ROI right now. Then we're going to move into sequential marketing, which is taking all that data in the best areas and then doing the perfect marketing system to those people. And then we're going to talk about deep prospecting. And that's where all those really big spreads are living. And it's one of the best strategies for getting the highest ROI and just squeezing the most out of your data. And you're going to walk away with the exact steps that people are using right now to turn those dead leads into massive $40,000 spreads, while your competition is burning so much money on just terrible strategies and terrible data in general. And make sure that you stick around for pillar 4, because I'm going to show you the exact AI workflow where those dead leads are becoming those 6-figure spreads that I was talking about. Okay, so first let's talk about market intelligence. This entire strategy is all about actually making good decisions based off real data and real numbers, because a lot of people just throw stuff against the wall. They kind of have an idea of what the good zip codes are, what the best areas are, and things like that. But the whole point of this is to think about this like we're fishing in a pond where we already know people are catching the fish. We already know where investors are buying the deals, so it's really good for wholesaling and really good for flipping because it's already proven. And the best way that you can do this is using our tool called the Market Finder. What the Market Finder does is breaks down a ton of different tabs. So you'll have investor transaction volume, days on market, homes that are being sold, and you can really use this to validate at the state level, the county level, the zip code level, and at the neighborhood level, what is actually going on. And the sort of magic number that I found here is that an area that has 10 or more investor transactions in a given month, those are areas that you should be focusing on. And especially because you're wholesaling, because those people are representing right now who's actively buying. And if there's not really anyone buying there, it's going to be really hard to dispo those deals. Also, when you're looking at it from a flipping perspective, there's always a reason that those people are buying deals there. And it's probably because it's a really good area for flipping in general. So it kind of validates that side as well. Now, there's 2 paths to look at this. One, at the county level, are there at least 10 investor transactions or more in a given month? On the high end, you'll see a couple hundred a month. On the low end, you'll see maybe 1 or 2. And if you find in a particular county it's actually less than that, you can actually go at a much granular level and focus on the zip codes and the neighborhoods. And whenever you go much deeper like that, you'll find that there's probably 3 to 5 zip codes, or maybe 1 to 3, just depends on the area, of where there's actually going to be transactions that are going on. So you can focus all of your marketing efforts in those couple zip codes, and probably over a 6-month period, there's going to be enough meat on the bone for everyone to win and for you to actually close deals. And the next kind of phase of market intelligence in general is something we call sold properties. This is a tool where you can actually validate everything that's going on in the market at a more granular depth than the Market Finder could do. And the point of this is we're trying to see all the people who sold to an investor that we found in the Market Finder, or just by the areas or geographic areas. What did that look like on a property characteristic level, and also on a list level, and just the people in general that are buying there. So think about it as a more deeper version of what I just kind of outlined. And the best example of this is, imagine we're talking very, very broad, and then we get more and more narrow by like what's going on at the state level, then going to the county, then going to the zip, then going to the neighborhood, and then who are the people that are actually buying those things inside of those areas, and what do the sellers actually look like who are selling to these people. And there's 2 really good strategies that pairs with this from a market intelligence perspective. The first is you can actually validate all the lists that are performing well. So oftentimes we'll see that equity is one of the biggest driving forces, age is oftentimes the second best, and the third is all those really big distressors that you can think of, like foreclosures, probates, etc. And we'll get really deep into this in pillar 2. You can use this to actually validate what you're doing before you dive into it. My second favorite way to use this is actually to build a better cash buyers list. So if you go in there and you see that there's a couple hundred transactions going on over a 3 or 4 month period, you can actually see what those people are buying at, see their entity, look them up, skip trace them, and then market to them to actually add them to your cash buyers list. And they're some of the best buyers. And oftentimes I'll kind of go through this process in my own market and I'm like, man, I cannot believe that they're paying that. And I immediately add them. And oftentimes it's like landlord buyers that you've just never heard of. And they're like just buying, one every 6 months, but they are really good buyers to add, as opposed to the VIP buyers who really are good buyers in general, but they're not going to pay nearly as much as some of those people. So the big takeaways of this pillar, oftentimes people are just using their feelings or their gut to actually make these decisions, but when really it can be very, very data driven and it works so much better. And that's actually how you build that longevity and that consistency. And the people that are doing this at the very, very top of the level are picking the best neighborhoods, the best zip codes, and just all those areas and focusing all their energy. And they're going very, very deep in those areas. And they're just maximizing every single portion within that market. And then once they've maxed out that zip code or that area, they then move to the second best, and then to the third, to the fourth, etc. And that's what builds that consistency, because they're going from the top and working their way down. But even the best market or the best areas is completely worthless without really good data. And here's how the data actually fits into that, which moves us into pillar 2, data hygiene. The whole point of this pillar is we're trying to keep our data as clean and tidy as possible, just to make sure that we're maximizing everything and really keeping it organized through the entire marketing process. And we're also trying to figure out what are the best lists and the best strategies in general that people are using for data right now. Hey, real quick, if you're liking this kind of content and you're just trying to get more consistent deal flow, in the description below we have something called the 5-Day Deal Flow Challenge. It is 15 hours of live content that just goes over every single part of the business that you actually need to know to get more consistent deals. And it always happens at the beginning of every single month, and it's also recorded in case you join late. And it's where we go over every part of the entire real estate business. It's from market analysis to data to marketing to sales, KPIs, operations, scaling, and just everything that you need to know to get consistent deal flow. And that at this point, we've had hundreds of people go through it. And it's the best strategies that we've seen from our over 5,000 person community and also from our own business. And literally within a week after going through the challenge, we've had people close deals from the strategies that they actually learned on this challenge. And it's only $27. There's absolutely no pressure at all. And it's down below in the description. Now, to get into the data, the first thing that we're going to break down is Sift Map. So what Sift Map is, it has every single distressor and lead list that you can possibly think of that has deals on it every month that we validate through those sold properties that I was talking about earlier in pillar 1. You can set up exactly what you're looking for from a marketing perspective, depending on your niche, whether that's probate or foreclosures. We have all the big ones. There's about 20 unique lists that we actually pull from. Then we have a ton of people who use our strategy called the first to market strategy. We have a ton of videos on this, but the whole point is that you're pulling in raw county data or governmental data, and then you're pulling it into the system to be the first ones to market to it, because it's always going to be faster whenever you get it from the county directly, as opposed to Sift Map, PropStream, Batch, wherever you're getting your data at. And the point is we want to pull all this data into something we call records. And the whole point of your records is to manage all of your data and know exactly what's going on from a marketing perspective, and tracking all of those actions. And that 4.5 million actions I was talking about earlier is all going through that platform there and into our CRM side. There's a ton of functionality here, but the main ones that I want to focus on for this is it links all of your marketing tools together. So if you have a dialer, it tells you how many dials that you have. If you were doing texting, it tells you how many texts that each person's actually got. If you're doing click to dial and you're really hot leads, how many unique attempts that each person's got. It pulls together all your lists and tags uniquely. And one of my favorite things that's really unique is it tells you if it's a complete record or an incomplete record. And if you've been doing marketing for a while, or especially my land people, a lot of the times records are really messy. Like they're just going to have just a random address name, but no street numbers or anything like that. And the reason that is because that is an incomplete record. A lot of times you have to manually go through and actually have a VA go through and clean that record. Obviously you could do it yourself, but the point is you're making that an incomplete record to a clean, complete record. And people always say, well, why would we even want to market to incomplete records? Oftentimes incomplete records have a ton of deals on them. It's really comparable to the unknown list back in the day if you've been doing this for a long time. Typically, people only market to the best of the best that's super clean. But those records, for whatever reason, that are incomplete, there's a ton of opportunities there. And we really don't want to throw those out, so we make a place just for them. And the whole point of this entire system is we're aggregating all these actions inside of one place. That way it cleanly goes through our marketing process from the cheapest to the most expensive touch, which is something we call the pendulum theory. And one of my favorite things and one of the hottest trends I think it's going to happen in 2026 is one of the best lead lists that you can ever have comes from the marketing efforts of your own campaigns. An example of this is, imagine that you have a bunch of properties that are actually coming together and you get a bunch of correct phone numbers. And I'm going to break down that entire list very deeply in pillar 3 in the sequential marketing flow. But to tie up all the data hygiene side, people who are amateurs and do this, they just throw a bunch of stuff against the wall. They go into PropStream, they download a list, they send it to a call agency, maybe they send it to the direct mail provider, and they don't track anything. and they waste so much of their marketing spend over a long period of time. And that could be maybe from people just not responding. Maybe you're not marketing to people in the right order. There's tons of different reasons for this, but I promise if you actually manage everything the way I just kind of outlined, you'll more than likely cut about half of your marketing budget and get so much more from your actual lead list and probably lower your cost per acquisition by another 30%. Now, once we understand where we're actually marketing and actually how to manage our data a little bit better, now let's talk about the actual sequential marketing flow and actually how to tie this a little more together. Sequential marketing is designed to squeeze the absolute maximum out of your list where you make as much money as humanly possible from your marketing actions. Think about it like you have the limit and you're squeezing that limit as hard as possible to just get the most amount of juice that you can. So the first thing that's really important in sequential marketing is the pendulum theory. The pendulum theory is broken up into two principles. The first principle is we always want to market from the cheapest to the most expensive touch and track every single action in between. That way we know what individual record is at what part in the actual pendulum. The second portion of the pendulum theory is you have that pendulum and it's always swinging back and forth with the channels, and that pendulum actually represents how sellers prefer to engage with marketing. If you've been doing this for a really long time, you'll know that back in 2018, you could just send out a couple thousand texts and just get a deal. Then you move into like 2020, 2021, direct mail became really, really hot again because it was unsaturated and people just weren't doing it. Then in 2023, PPL became so hot, a ton of people jumped on it, but there was a time there where you could probably get like 1 in every 10 was a deal. Now we're back in today where cold calling is really picking up steam again. And the whole point is that pendulum is always swinging, and we want to diversify the risk of that pendulum swinging away from a marketing channel that you were doing. Because oftentimes you'll see gurus talk about how hot a new channel is, a new tactic, something like that. And there's always a couple months where it does really, really well, and then it just completely flops and dies. And that's because the pendulum's always swinging because the level of saturation where people just jump on it, incinerate it, and then move on to the next. And the sequential marketing flow that I'm about to outline diversifies your risk against all of that and keeps your cost per acquisition low. And the really important thing is it will always work and it is evergreen. Now to get into what my process looks like, I always move to cold calling first. For click to dials, I'll do 3 cycles on my first to market county data. For my bulk dialing, I do 6 different attempts for this. And if I still haven't reached them through cold calling, I then move them to direct mail. And the reason for that, just to kind of tie some math with this, I can do a full cycle of calling and it is still cheaper than 1 direct mail touch. I will always get deals from that, and that's a good example of how you're doing the cheapest to the most expensive touch, actually following the pendulum theory. Because a lot of people will just download a list and do a ton of direct mail right off the bat and just leave out the front end of the pendulum. And if they still haven't actually answered through the cold calling process, then I move them to the direct mail process where we'll do probably 3 to 6 touches just depending on what's going on with that actual property. And this is the really, really big one. Oftentimes when people do calling or texting and then move to direct mail, and there are properties that are vacant, undeliverable on mail, or just return mail in general, those are oftentimes leads that people just toss out and just never do anything with. And in the very beginning of the video when I was talking about those massive 6-figure spreads, this is where that comes in. So imagine that you have a property that's going to auction or they're going to foreclosure, which this is a true story, by the way. You go through this process, you do your calling, you move to direct mail, and you realize that the property is actually vacant and we can't mail it, and they didn't respond to any of our calling or texting efforts. But you know it's going to auction the next 3 or 4 weeks. 99.9% of you would just toss that lead out and just say, oh, we tried, can't do anything. And this is where deep prospecting comes in. Deep prospecting, very simply, is being a detective to find the hardest to reach people because they are oftentimes the most unsaturated and the best possible leads that no one is even trying to reach out to. And the best way to think about it is like we're just digging for buried treasure because we had the map that actually took us here, which was all that marketing flows and all those marketing actions that I was just talking about. And a few minutes ago, whenever I broke down that the best lead lists always come from the marketing actions of our own data, this is exactly what I meant. Because it's not sustainable to deep prospect an entire list, but it is very sustainable to deep prospect the people who you couldn't reach through the other cheaper means. So deep prospecting is broken up into 4 different levels. The first level is just basic skip tracing. If you're not familiar with skip tracing, it's basically guessing what phone numbers are associated with a particular owner. Maybe it's pulling in relatives and associates that could be associated with that property address. It's very, very common, and probably everyone watching this video has actually done it at some point, and I would categorize that as a very shallow depth of deep prospecting. Then if you can't reach that person through the numbers you actually skip traced, or you couldn't reach them via mail or whatever it is your strategies that you had on the front end of your sequential marketing flows, then we move into level 2. Level 2 is a medium depth, and you typically do this whenever the name and address just doesn't line up, and the whole point is you're trying to validate through the recorder, through the auditor, or through your government sites for your actual county that these people are the actual owners, Nothing weird hasn't happened, other there's not any technical issues with the deed itself. And the whole point of this is you're trying to actually go and find the deed chain, because a lot of the times you'll find there could be clerical issues with the deed, or probably the most common issue, and this is where we move into level 3, the owner is actually deceased, maybe the property's stuck in probate, maybe it's in limbo and hasn't made it to probate but it needs to be pushed through, maybe the property's going to auction because they can't reach the owner. There's a ton of legal issues that can come up from this point, and this is when we move into level 3, and this is where the real magic starts to happen. This is a deep level of research. This is oftentimes where people start to use genealogy, air maps, things like that to actually map out what's going on with the property, who's the owner, who are their children, maybe their siblings, things of that nature. And they're trying to understand if the owner is actually deceased, who would be the next likely person or the next decision maker to actually reach out to. Then from this point, it'll become very clear that this is the next person in line, or it'll get even messier and move down to level 4 into a complex title issue. This is where you hear things like curative title, messy title. There's a ton of different strategies out there for this. And it is by far, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest deals that I have ever seen in the entire space. And I've been doing this for almost 10 years. This is typically where there's a pretty big issue. This could be something like there are multiple heirs. Some people want to sell, some people don't. Maybe it's very unclear who the next heir actually is because it needs to go through probate. Maybe that there are people who are just angry and don't want to sell it off due to some family issues or something like that. So some people will go in, they'll buy out portions of the actual ownership of the property. Some people will go through and get sign-offs on all the different heirs that could be the possible owners. There are a ton of different examples, and we'll have a ton of videos about this in the future, but that's the point of level 4. And where the real magic starts to happen here is we've been doing this process for years, and back in the day, you used to have a VA doing this entire process and have to be manual. We'd have several people dedicated to our own team to actually doing this. They're going through, they're actually doing all this manual research, they're coming up with an air map, they're verifying deeds, they're finding the individuals, getting their contact info, whole complete process. But now with the use of AI and AI agents, you can automate this entire process. And the tool that I prefer to use for this is a tool called Manus. Manus is absolutely incredible. I've tested them all. If you feel like there's a better one out there, feel free to let me know in the comments, but Manus has worked exceptionally well for me. First thing that you're gonna do is you want to use Manus to have the max capability. At the time of this video, it would be max 1.6. You're gonna take this prompt that you see here, and at the very, very bottom, you're actually input all the property information, whether that's a title, a deed, property address, a filing for a foreclosure, doesn't really matter. And you're going to run this prompt inside of Manus. This usually takes 5 to 20 minutes. My average is probably like 7 or 8 minutes though. Per run, on average, this typically will cost anywhere from $1.50 to $4.50, which is also what I was showing when I was going over the pendulum theory. And it's gonna give you a ton of information back. The first thing is it actually goes through all the levels and determines what this actual property address is, whether it's level 1 through 4. More than likely, if you've made it this far, it's probably anywhere in the level 2 to level 4 range. And oftentimes I've seen it be level 3. It's going to tell you exactly what's going on with the property, any distress factors that you could find, any issues with title that I could find, and the really, really big thing, the air maps and who the decision makers actually are for this property address. I've seen everything from siblings to children and everything in between. And at the very, very end, it will give you that air map and tell you who you actually need to manually skip trace and look up to find this individual decision maker. Now, once you've actually found that decision maker, you need to skip trace them. There are 3 companies that I recommend that are much higher quality because you're manually skip tracing them. And just a quick blurb about skip tracing, there's restricted and unrestricted. Restricted is typically manually done, whereas unrestricted is typically for marketing use cases that you would see with things like Sift. And we absolutely want to use the manual ones because it's super unscalable to do it, but you want to get the best possible numbers. And there are 3 companies that I recommend for this. Been Verified, TLO, and Forewarn. Forewarn is one of the best ones. It's very hard to get though, and you have to be an agent to actually do it. My number 1 recommendation though has been Verified. They're not sponsored. I don't make anything from saying that. This is just what I've found through the testing. And you're going to take that information that Manus actually gave back to you, and then you're going to manually skip trace that, add all those phone numbers together, and add it to your CRM. And in my case, obviously, I'm adding it to Siftline. We're going to manually call this person on a one-off basis. And from this point, we're hoping that we're going to reach them, and we can also do direct mail to them. And once we have all the documentation actually inside the CRM, we're going to call them, we're going to text them, we're going to email them, we're going to do everything in our possible power to actually reach them. One of my favorite ways that I've actually found someone is going through Facebook, finding them and messaging them, just saying, hey, I'm trying to reach out to you, give them the whole pitch. We're not going to get into sales on this video. We have a ton of other content about that. But the point is we want to do everything in the pendulum that we were talking about from the cheapest to most expensive because we want to reach this person in all cases because we know more than likely no one else has and they're really motivated. This is also, if you still cannot reach them by any of those means, like digitally, if you will, this is when you go in and door knock. In our community, we've seen some crazy stuff. One of my absolute favorite stories of this, they actually had someone deliver pizza to that address, and they had the pizza man leave a note for them to have them reach back out to them. Crazy. And obviously, you can just go in and do a standard door knock, but the point is we want to go to them and give a very personalized touch actually at their home. In my opinion, this is the best way to do door knocking because it always follows the pendulum theory and it's very, very sustainable to do this. And just a few things to keep in mind as you're going through this process and want to actually implement this, which I highly recommend. One, the prompt structure that you actually need to execute this is inside of that custom blueprint that I showed you guys earlier. Two, make sure you're only deep prospecting people that are actual opportunities. So try to verify that they have equity, that they have motivation, etc., because it's a lot of energy to do this and it's well worth it. Just make sure that you're verifying that it's really good data first. And the third thing, just make sure that you're actually watching your costs by running these deep prospecting flows. It can cost around, $1 to $4 just depending, but that does add up really, really fast whenever you do it dozens of times. And the whole point of this pillar is the harder they are to reach, the bigger the opportunity that they actually are, and the deeper that you're willing to go is directly equivalent to the amount of money that you're going to make. This is one of my favorite structures, and I highly recommend that you to try it out. And it's going to yield so many more deals. And across those 4.5 million actions that are happening every single day on our platform, we also get a ton of data on actually what deals are happening on what lists and what strategies are all of our users are actually doing today. And about 20 to 30% of all deals on our platform come from deep prospecting. So I highly recommend it. And when you combine all four of these pillars together, you're not just getting more deals, but you're also getting much bigger spreads overall. So you're going to get lower cost per acquisition or lower cost per deals and way bigger spreads on your assignments and or your flips in general. And just to recap the entire flow here, we always want to keep market intelligence in mind because we want to make sure that we're fishing in the right ponds where people are actually catching fish right now. And then we always want to have really good data hygiene just to make sure we're not wasting any of the bait that we're actually using in that pond. And sequential marketing is making sure that we're catching every single fish in that pond before we ever move to the next pond. And then we get into deep prospecting. We're actually going to find those massive monsters in the bottom of the lake bed that no one else is actually finding, where you're going to get those crazy spreads. And this is how you're going to dominate your deal flow in 2026. And if you want to master these strategies and stay ahead of your competition, we post videos like this every single week on our channel. So make sure you like and subscribe. Thanks.